everyone. Welcome back to Escape from San Francisco podcast. Today's guest is from psychosocial.media, Instagram, psychosocial media, and also a psychosocial therapist. Today's guest is a licensed marriage family therapist, Luis Cornejo. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Aaron. I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me and having me on your podcast.
Now, I, I was thankful that you're able to accept the invite and come on. I always love talking to therapists and people that work in the mental health field that are able to work with the vulnerable population.
Yeah.
As I'm starting my career, I'm still kind of new in my career that I've been venturing in after college, but learning, working with people that are vulnerable, people of color, in the LGBT community, working with people that normally don't get help because of cultural
Mm-hmm.
stigma behind it.
Yeah.
And so talking to people that specialize working with this group of say group of people, it I wanted to know more about it and it excited me. That's why I reached out to you, and I think you're onto something, very great. And I wish there was more therapists out there like you. And I know there is, but
Yeah.
I don't know where to find them at. And so
Yeah.
you starting a media venture, it's put you out there, and you're probably gonna get people that might not have the resources prior. So
Yeah.
thank you for coming on.
Yeah. No, thank you for inviting me. And definitely, I agree with you. I think it's super important, to talk about vulnerable populations. And there are a lot of stigmas, and also barriers, right? Whether it's systemic barriers, financial, a lot of things. So I'm glad that you're seeking out people, and you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, there are therapists of color out there, but they're not the majority. And I'm hoping that that's going to change because there definitely is a high need. I think that people respond better and feel more comfortable with people that can relate to them, right? Whether it's culturally, whether it's identity wise, like LGBTQ. So I am hoping that that also does change, so something to inspire people out there who are people of color who are maybe considering a career in the mental health field. You're very much needed, and I mean, yeah, it makes a huge difference.
So how did you become a therapist? What sparked that interest for you, and well, what was that journey like?
For me, I've always had the desire to want to work with people. And when I initially went to college, um, I wanted to be a doctor. And, typical, my parents pushed like, que seas doctor, be a doctor, yada, yada. I got there, I started bio, I started chem. I hated it, absolutely did not enjoy it, thought it was like, just not fun. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why am I even trying so hard to do something that I didn't even really want to do or be? And it was in that moment that I started to look into careers and thinking, well, I know I want to work with people. I know that I want to help people, but I don't know what exactly I want to do or how to do it. And I had another friend who was also in the same major in bio, and she also decided, I don't want to do this. This is not for me. And so we both started to look into like, what are options, right? What are things that we can really put our heart into and our soul and do as a career? And we ended up enrolling in the child development program at San Francisco State. And at first, my idea was like, okay, I'm going to go through this program because it includes a lot of psychology. I could see myself as a teacher. I could see myself as a school psychologist. And I went through the program. I absolutely loved it. I became a straight A student. I mean, it was such a huge 360 for me, just the difference between bio and, social science and understanding development and children's mental health. And I loved it. And I ended up finishing the program, graduated, and went straight into a child development center in San Francisco where I was working as a teacher with children who were between the ages of, I would say, like maybe like 8 months to 5 years old. And so I was working in different classrooms, and it was great. I loved it. I love kids. I love the developmental piece, really understanding the psychology behind it and how we develop our emotional regulation, how we develop our physical functions, our connections with people. And so it was a great job. I got to not just observe but also help parents by helping them learn about their children, and what was normal behavior and what was not abnormal but maybe something to watch out for, things like that. And so I loved it, and I did that for a while. And I think after a couple years, I kept thinking, I love this, but it's not exactly what I wanted to do. And I just that I enjoyed working with the adults as well, like the parents when we had parent conferences or when I was kind of guiding them. And I thought, you know, I've always saw myself as someone that was empathetic, that was definitely willing to listen, um, and that loved to hear stories. Like I grew up hearing stories in my family. My mom's from Guatemala, my dad's from Mexico, and they were always telling the stories, and I loved it. I loved listening to people. And so I thought, maybe I should go into the mental health field. And I started to do a lot of research, and it was, so there's so much out there. It was a little bit frustrating at first because I was seeing social work, I was seeing marriage and family therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and I was like, oh my god, like what is it that I want to do? And um, I ended up going with marriage and family therapy because of the fact that I noticed it focused specifically on relationships. It emphasized family dynamics. It emphasized a lot more of the personal growth versus social work, where it was a lot more of system approach, and very very a little bit different. So I did my research, and I only applied to one school, and that was Cal State Long Beach. I told myself if I get in, I will go there, and if I don't, then I'll just stay as a teacher and figure something else out. And it's funny because right now when I was bringing that up, I was thinking about how when I went to my interview, because they actually got my application and they decided to interview me. My parents actually went with me to the interview, and I was just picturing them in my head right now because they dressed up like they were going to church, and they were like right by me, and I was the only one bringing their parents. I'm like 20 something. My parents are sitting in the waiting room with all of these like well dressed people with their briefcases, and they're ready for their interview. And for me, family's always been important, and my parents have been my biggest fans. And they pushed me through school, and they're the ones that really motivated me to get into my education and really encouraged me to do things. And so I bring them along for everything. So they were there, and I did my interview, and I left thinking, you know what, like this is probably not going to work out. It's okay. Came back to San Francisco after going down to LA for that, and my parents came up, and I think it was a week later I got a call, and the head of the department was like, I want to offer you a spot. Like we only took this many students, and we had to, this was how many applications we got, and you're one of the people that we wanted to accept. For me, it was that moment, like being the first in my family to not just have a bachelor's degree, but now going into a master's program. So I started crying in the restaurant. My parents were like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, I got into the program, and I was so excited. And at that point, I was like, "Do I know what I'm getting myself into?" Like, I know therapy seems so mysterious, and I didn't have any experience with it either. I fell in love with the idea of helping people and really providing that care, but I had never been to therapy. I had never really understood exactly what the process was, which I mean is the point, right? Because when you go to school, obviously that's what they're teaching you. But I mean, for someone that was going into the field and not really knowing too much, I remember going in with so many different like expectations and assumptions, thinking like, okay, maybe they'll give us like secrets on like how to resolve people's problems or how to say certain things that are gonna, and it was a total culture shock. Um, it was an amazing 2.5 years. It was a lot. Definitely a master's degree is tough, and I learned a lot. I had a lot of moments of questioning if I got into the right field, especially after learning about some of the tougher sides of mental health, right? Whether it was like depression, suicide, ideation, self harm, things like that I had never really worked with. And so it was a lot. And I think going through that process and having to go to therapy, which was a requirement for my program, really made a huge difference. And that's when I really realized, at least for myself, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I want to do. And this was like 6 years ago. Now I'm a licensed therapist and I've been working with people for a while. So it's definitely changed, but I don't think I had an idea that this was the career I was going to end up with. I think it was more of the feeling of I want to do something to help people. And then everything else just kind of opened up.
Wow, it's an amazing story. That's the drive and determination to get to that point. There's nothing more supportive than Latino and Latinx parents. They might not want to go to therapy themselves, but they'll support you to become a therapist. That's for sure.
It's hilarious you're saying that because I told my mom the other day, I'm like, you should go to therapy, mom. It's helpful. She's like, oh no, I don't. I'm okay. She's very religious, but
Hmm.
as soon as someone asks her, what does your son do? She's promoting me. Oh, he's a therapist. He helps so many people, and I'm like, oh my god, and it's a funny thing. You're absolutely right. Very supportive. I have to say though that over the last few years, because I've become a therapist, they have opened up a lot more. So even in recent conversations, they have been more receptive when I talk about mental health or when I say we should go to therapy versus before when I first started and they're like, why are you doing that? Like, are people going to hurt you if they're like crazy? Things, just a lot of stereotypes, right? They didn't really have an experience with mental health or even I mean, they had their own mental, but not an experience with the way it is in terms of a profession. So
Hmm.
it was interesting, and it definitely has shifted. But I am grateful, extremely grateful that they've always been supportive without question once I decide to do something, and there's that trust there. So I agree with you definitely. There's something that I think is very very powerful about Latino families, right? That we stick together in a lot of ways, and there's obviously going to be some stuff where it can get a little icky or sticky in terms of situations, but for the most part, I think that's definitely a very important, just very very powerful aspect of Latino families.
Yeah, and that's one thing that speaking with people, I ask people what questions should I ask the guests that I have on my podcast. Because I want to get perspective from other people as well. Because I know what I want, kind of want to talk about, but I want to see what other people are interested in. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that was brought to me from my girlfriend is that we have conversations about this a lot, and it's like about toxic masculinity, but specifically in the Latino culture, growing up
Yeah,
Mexican, growing up in that type of environment,
yeah,
there's some things looking back, and I realized, well, that was pretty bad that we
yeah,
had to go through that, and it was normalized,
yeah,
and so I have sometimes a hard issues saying, well, what's toxic, what's not, because
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I feel like I'm trying to defend whether it's like myself or defend some other, but it's not really
yeah,
like that. I just take it, sometimes everyone takes things personal, and
yeah,
so sometimes I take some things personal and I realize like, oh, I need to step back and actually listen and learn from what people are trying to say instead of like
yeah,
trying to like defend and obfuscate get away from the from that and try to make it
yeah,
about something else. So how
yeah,
do you feel about that that type of subject
yeah.
in the culture that you grew up in?
I have a very interesting perspective, and I don't know if everyone will agree with me. I mean, I know not everyone will agree with me, but for me, when I think of toxic anything, the first thing that is crucial in understanding is that something toxic is something harmful, right? Something
Hmm.
that harms either ourselves or harms our relationships with other people or harms our connections, right? That impacts us in some way. Masculinity, this is a thing that there's so many constructs, right, socially, and really our understanding of them is not always it's not always, how can I put this, very tolerant, right? I know right now if someone heard me say like, oh, masculinity is this, people might say like, oh, I don't agree with that. It's not a good thing. But I don't think I don't think that's true. I think that with everything, there's always going to be good things and bad things about certain things. Like masculinity is not exactly a negative thing. Toxic behaviors, of course, when we're talking about someone who is too prideful to listen, and it's causing them harm in their relationship, yeah, that can be something toxic. When we talk about someone who's abusive or uses their power to dominate or to use and reinforce stereotypes, right? Like maybe For example, demeaning gay men because they're feminine, or demeaning women, right, because they believe that women have a specific role. I mean, that's toxic to me. But there's other stuff in masculinity that I don't think is toxic, right? When we're talking about the father role, when we're talking about men, wanting to do what's best for their family, when we're talking about men using strength, right, and all those things as healing and helpful for them. I think that it really does depend. And that's the thing about toxic masculinity, is that it's very debatable. And it is confusing, right? Because we don't just want to
Hmm.
say being masculine is a negative thing, because then a lot of people are going to feel like, well, what am I supposed to be, right? Or how am I supposed to react in
Yeah.
certain situations?
People feel like you're attacking their identity because they identify
Hmm.
as masculine, or they identify as male, and so when you say that, it feels like you're attacking them, and so they don't listen to what you're
Yeah,
trying to say. And what I
yeah,
would say about what you pointed out is, like, I agree with that. Yeah, there's good and they're bad, and I don't think
yeah,
to have it simplified that everything's all bad, that's just to not actually address issues that are really prominent. And
yeah.
some of the issues that are prominent in the Latino culture is like not wanting to speak about the feelings, and that was
Hmm.
something that's
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
present growing up. No
Yeah.
one ever talked about it. I seen my grandfather cry once, and it was because
Hmm.
his best friend passed away, and I seen
Yeah,
he was like, it was like 15 seconds, and that was it. I've
yeah,
never seen him ever be vulnerable. I've never
yeah.
seen, the only time I see my father be vulnerable is when his father passed away. It's little things like that. I'm not saying that I have to see it all the time to know that they're human beings,
Hmm.
that they are vulnerable too. But
Hmm.
that's something that I never had conversations with them
Yeah,
about. And it's
yeah.
something that it's hard to break down those barriers. And sometimes
Hmm.
I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to see that
Hmm.
different side of the person. So
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
have to be careful for what you ask for, because if you're opening doors, it might not
Yeah.
be what you actually want.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think part of the big part of it is also deciphering that, right, for ourselves, because you're absolutely right. I think that one of the big stigmas and just stereotypes, especially in the Latino community for men, is the machismo piece, right? That men don't cry, men don't express emotions. You're absolutely right, and in a lot of ways, it does hinder our ability to see ourselves as human, to see ourselves as vulnerable. Because there's that stereotype, right, that only women cry and men are supposed to be strong and hold things in. And the problem with that is that, unfortunately, a lot of men turn to the one emotion that is the most helpful, and that's anger, right? So when we're talking about anger, it's like a lot of men use anger, right, when they raise their voice, or when they use physical abuse. Talking about like the toxic part, obviously not all men in general, but these are the behaviors that I guess people refer to as like the more toxic in masculinity, is when people revert to utilizing anger as a way of expressing emotion, right? Because what we understand from anger is that anger is in a lot of ways a secondary emotion, right? It's a reaction. And there's a lot of emotions that are hidden under people. It could be shame, guilt, sadness, frustration. It could be, a lot of different feelings. And so I think that's one of the things that causes a little bit of harm, is when men don't feel free or open to be able to really express their feelings or say what they're thinking, because they have to fit under this role that doesn't allow them to be human, right? And so I think that's where it's important to decipher and really differentiate, when we're talking about those, how it impacts men, right? Because men should be allowed. I mean, at least I personally believe it, and I think a lot of people would agree that men are human beings, right? We're all human, and we are allowed to have our feelings. We are allowed to not agree with things. We're allowed to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel excited, to feel happy, and not being able to express those things can definitely lead to I think, a lot of like suppression, and also a lot of what's that word I'm trying to use? A lot of passive aggressiveness, right? Where people don't say what they really think or feel, and so their needs are not met. Um, we see this a lot in relationships, where people always assume that at least heterosexual relationships, where people always assume that women are the ones that are more emotional and talk more, and men are supposed to be like quiet and like not say anything, not express themselves. And then I tend to see that a lot when I see people come in and they'll tell me, my relationship, this is what's happening. And so a lot of my work is with men, is helping them understand that, it's okay for them to express themselves. It's okay for them to say what they're thinking. It's okay for them to also, uh, you know, navigate through some of the things that they learned growing up, right? Whether it was messages they received, from other male figures that maybe said, "No llores, don't cry. You're not supposed to cry. Only girls do this." Yada yada, whatever it is, and helping them really navigate through those things so that they can have more authentic relationships. So I definitely agree with you that there is this is a I think it's healthy, but I also know that it's not easy. And do men that I've worked with in the past, there has been a struggle, right? Because it's an identity thing, right? I mean, they've identified with this for so long, and then coming in and saying, it's okay for you to cry. It's a lot. I mean, a lot of times we don't know, right? Because we learn this as children, right? We learn what's okay and what's not okay. And culturally, for Latinos, with boys, we're a lot tougher, right? We don't like to see boys cry or say feelings. And I've seen this firsthand. My own family and other people, where boys are expected to act and be a certain way, just like girls. But with girls, it's okay for them to cry. It's okay for them to say their feelings. It's okay for them to express themselves, because people assume they're just naturally emotional. But with men, it's like, it's not okay. Even though we see the same behavior. I mean, I see little boys cry for the same thing little girls cry, but we react differently to each of them.
And then the opposite is true too, as far as I personally went through it with my girlfriend, is that she's more of the outspoken type and speak her mind and stuff, and people don't like that either.
Yeah.
And so she's out there speaking her mind, doing things, and
Hmm.
and they're like pushing back against that as well. Like she had to stay within her role or her gender
Hmm.
role,
Hmm.
and that's you see that dynamic play out too in society, or the area where we grew up at and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing I wanted to hit on was, I'm starting to learn that I'm a very positive person,
Hmm.
but I'm starting to learn like that. I hate going back to toxic, but like toxic positivity is like something I'm learning, where something that just being overwhelmingly positive is not so beneficial.
Yeah.
And so I'm starting to learn that I was doing it because I didn't want to allow the emotions to take place.
Hmm.
So I would do it all the times with the clients at work.
Yeah.
And I thought I was helping them. Now looking back, I realized I wasn't allowing them to go through their emotional
Hmm.
state. I
Hmm.
wasn't allowing them to feel. I wanted them to feel happy all the time, which is unrealistic. I wanted them not to feel what they're feeling.
Yeah.
I understand when we work with a very vulnerable population that
Yeah.
they're going to have extreme highs and lows,
Yeah.
and that some of that needs to be addressed by medication, through therapy, and through other
Hmm.
forms.
Yeah.
Talk therapy is what I like to do. Everyone does, especially in the place of work. I work in the substance abuse and mental health field, so I was a substance abuse counselor prior, and I used to work as a case manager. So
Yeah.
I did a lot of individual counseling, not therapy, but it's just a little form of it.
Yeah.
Um, but in there, I understand I would do that sometimes, and I would do that for my own self because it's something that I have struggled with, I guess, personally.
Hmm.
And so now I'm learning more about it, because people would tell me about it, and I would like brush it off and be like, I know what I'm doing, blah
Yeah.
blah blah, or that's just how you're supposed to get by. You have to be
Yeah.
positive all the time. You can't
Yeah.
you can't feel the emotions.
Yeah.
And now that I'm taking a step back and I'm realizing like, oh,
Yeah.
I, I, I hope I wasn't doing more harm than good. I hope that I wasn't putting people in the position not to
Yeah.
heal and learn from their emotions that they're feeling. And so it's something that it's not only in what I was doing, but it's also carrying over to workplaces.
Hmm.
A lot of workers, a lot of companies are starting to put this whole positivity thing in the workspace, and want people to be okay with the work crappy work conditions they have, or their crappy work schedule, or the workload they're putting on people, and they're investing a lot in this like positivity movement, and they're kind of taking like they're kind of like corporatizing it and taking over like Buddhism and all this stuff, and I'm starting to
Yeah.
see all that, and it's
Yeah.
like, wow, like what? How do we step back from that, and how do we address that going forward?
Yeah.
Especially when your role is to make people feel better, but
Mhm.
not to the point where it's artificial.
Yeah, yeah, and I really appreciate your vulnerability with that. I think that a lot of us, um, out there do struggle with that, right? Because it is something, like I said, that goes back to cultural messages. I know for me, my parents would always tell me, they're very, like I said, they're very religious, and they're always telling me, everything's going to be fine. Like, don't worry about it. Like, don't feel sad. Don't feel angry. Like, God is going to fix things. And it was this idea that we weren't entitled to have feelings and that we had to be positive, right? The positivity got us through everything because it was this belief that something good will happen. And as a therapist, something that I've learned is that we're human, and that means that we have a human experience, which means a range of things, right? Whether it's loss, grief, sadness, anger, disappointment, happiness, joy. I mean, these are all things that we experience, right? That we come equipped with, right? These emotions are there for a reason. We're born with them. They're not something that just come out of nowhere, and they're tools, right? Our emotions are tools. One of my favorite movies is Inside Out by Pixar, only because a lot of what they explain was how our emotions function in a way to help us, right? But the problem is that a lot of us have grown up seeing them as a negative thing, right? These emotions are bad. They don't feel good, so they're bad. But the reality is that, you know, we're not meant to always feel good, right? If we were meant to always be happy, then we would be, right? But we
Yeah.
experience other things, and so we go through a range of different emotions. And I think it's so important for us to, instead of pushing them away, and not embracing them, to really learn from them and understand the function of emotions. I have people come into my practice, and they'll say things like, I don't want to feel anxiety anymore. I don't want to feel worried anymore. And I tell them, look, the reality is we can't get rid of that. If you are not worried, or you don't have anxiety, or you don't have any feelings, then you're not alive. Right? You're not feeling things. So I can't get rid of that for you. But what we can do is we can learn about it, how it works for you, how it functions, and what are things that we can utilize as coping strategies. Because that's the thing, that nobody wants to go through the tough emotions. We want to go through the happy ones. We want to feel happy and feel
Hmm.
good, but we don't want to feel sad. And yet, sadness is such a huge part of being human. It's part of our experience, right? Being able to cry, being able to feel sadness, even disappointment. I forgot who I was talking to the other day. I think it was one of my close friends, and I was telling her a story about my niece recently, and how she wanted an iPad, and my brother told her no. And she started to cry, and his first reaction is like, why are you crying? Why are you crying? I already told you why you can't have one. You don't need to cry. And I sat there and I observed, and my brother and I are very close, and I try to be as respectful of him as possible, because, like I said, he's obviously not very versed in mental health, and he's just someone that I would say is the normal population, right, where people don't have that background. Um, and he was asking her, and when she left, I sat down, and I remember telling him, we need to respect that she's disappointed, and that's she's allowed to feel disappointed. And I know that it feels very personal, because it feels like you're the one disappointing her, but you're her dad. I know you're doing what you're doing to do what's best for her, but we still need to respect her reaction, right? Like, we need to be okay with that. And it was so hard for him to watch her cry. Like, he didn't want her to cry. And it was this interesting kind of just example that I'm sharing, because it's how we're not comfortable. It's uncomfortable, and so we want to stop it. And that was his initial thing,
Hmm.
was like, I need to stop this. And I sat there and I said, it's okay. We have to let her feel her feelings. And after she was done, she came over, she sat with me, and we talked about it. We talked about things, and being the therapist in the people kind of like, you go do this, you go do that. And me, it's for me, it's like, no, we need to do this as a family. This is how we can do this. And so, I'm definitely a talker. And so we sat down and, we had a little conversation and, she was okay. And I just remember telling my brother, we all have feelings and I know it's uncomfortable, but we need to be okay with feelings and the way that they look. And so for that, giving that example, because I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that we're not taught to be okay with feelings. We're taught to avoid them. We're taught to find automatic cures or coping strategies like alcohol, sex, uh, drugs, shopping, all these other things. I'm not saying they're bad things, but we use them as a band-aid, as a way to cover up a lot of our emotions. And so that's one of the biggest problems, right? That if we see them as our enemy, then we're constantly battling with ourselves and our emotions, and we're trying to find ways to like plug them up. And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. And I want to just acknowledge that and also validate that piece right there about how getting to know our emotions isn't easy, because I've had clients who have told me, I don't like how it feels, and you're telling me to sit with it, but my body literally reacts to it, and I can't even like I can't even I don't even know how I'm containing it. And so then I work with them through different body exercises, and we talk more about it. But it is hard, right? Because a lot of us, we don't know how to be okay with them, and so I mean, it's a physical thing, right? Like I don't know if you've ever felt so sad or something in your chest where like you had an emotion and you couldn't even like express it, and
Hmm.
just felt like you were gonna choke on it, and it's like this. I mean, that's what it can feel like for a lot of people. So I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that, and when we put in the positivity spin and just be positive, we're literally just saying like you can't feel anything else but positivity, and if you're feeling something else, it's because you're negative, and that's not
Yeah.
true. And so that's why I don't agree with that. I think toxic positivity is an issue at a larger scale because it's being used as a marketing kind of tactic. It's also being used systemically, which we know companies are not always the best people to trust when it comes to, especially people of color or people who are in minorities or disenfranchised groups. So I think that spin is a ploy, right? It's kind of a way to get people to buy into this idea that you should be accepting of things and just find positivity in it, and that's not always the case, right? I don't think that's a reality.
It's just a fancier way of saying pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah, yeah,
Basically, that's what it is, and it's just like our way of societal thinking of like you have to help yourself out individually. You're individually responsible for all the issues that you have, and it's nothing had to do with the system.
yeah,
And that's not how it is. Sometimes it is a mix of both. Sometimes it is individually.
yeah,
It is, but to have it only all individual or all systematic, you're never going to actually address the real issues. And
yeah.
so that's something that does plague us today.
Mm-hmm,
And like you
mm-hmm.
said, we find other outlets. So as a substance
Mm-hmm.
abuse counselor, I saw people that came in that weren't able to deal with their trauma. They weren't able
Yeah,
to deal with their stress, anxiety,
yeah,
the issues that they face.
yeah.
So when I would work with them, you would see it play out. I worked with individuals that come from domestic violence, that have
Mm-hmm,
come from
mm-hmm.
very serious trauma, that were incarcerated, that institutionalized individuals from all different backgrounds that would come in,
Mm-hmm.
and you would see them,
Mm-hmm.
and you would see different attributes. So I was able to pick up on them over time. As far as like when you're working with a DV client, you have
Yeah,
to make sure that you announce what you're doing. I
yeah,
couldn't just stand up right
yeah.
away because then they would, panic or freak out a little bit. I
Mm-hmm,
would ask, can I
mm-hmm.
stand up to open the window? Would you like to sit right in this chair right here? Or would you
Mm-hmm.
like to sit in the other chair? Well, when you're addressing someone, and then sometimes when you're making progress and you're talking about something deep that comes up, you just see like their body and their persona change.
Mm-hmm.
Like you see them like slump
Mm-hmm.
over, like they
Yeah,
start to get into
yeah,
like they're becoming a kid again.
yeah,
You start to see
yeah.
all these things, and you pick up on them. I didn't have that higher level of education where I was able to address the needs, and also I was staying in my scope of range. I don't ever
Yeah.
try to pass that.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting to see that. And that's why I was always fascinated with
Yeah.
therapists on how they're able to address
Yeah.
these situations. Because as a
Yeah.
counselor, a substance abuse counselor, it was very difficult because it was like
Yeah.
a wave of emotions that you're trying to take
Yeah.
in, and then
Yeah.
you're also taking in the secondhand trauma. So I was listening
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
stories of all this craziness that was going on in their life. And I was trying not to take that home with me at the end of the day. And I was also not trying to use it in other ways that would cause me to have my own issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you said, you're dealing with people that have anxiety, whether I have anxiety myself. I remember
Mm-hmm.
there was an issue one time at work where someone was having a seizure and we had to call 911.
Yeah.
I remember the first time that happened, I was panicking like everyone else, but I was
Yeah.
trying to stay calm and collected and be professional and
Yeah.
making sure that it was addressed.
Yeah.
And with
Yeah.
seeing something and reacting for the first time, we're all human beings and we all go through it
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. And I don't think individuals that we help, understand that. And I
Yeah.
don't. It's okay, but it's like we both have to have that balancing act of
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we both stay within our ranges so we can help each
Mm-hmm.
other because
Yeah.
they're helping you as much as you're helping them. And
Mm-hmm.
it's about making sure that you're not doing no harm, that you're addressing the needs that they have, and that you're doing the best you can. You're not going to fix everything. You might not. It might take
Yeah.
years and years of therapy before
Yeah.
they're able to be okay.
Yeah.
And you probably see progress. And uh, if you hit, their trauma right on some of the issues that they don't want to talk about, they
Mm-hmm.
might not even come back to see you no more because
Yeah.
they don't want to
Yeah.
deal with it. And then so uh, what they do is they turn to substances, and so you would see people abuse alcohol where it would becoming
Mm-hmm.
chronic, where they're hospitalized, and
Yeah.
if they're going down that path, they're going to get cirrhosis, or they might
Mm-hmm.
already have cirrhosis, and they're already told that if they don't quit, they're going to die, but they still
Mm-hmm.
can't put it down, or
Yeah.
they're running away
Very
from issues
complex.
that are
Very
very complex
complex.
situations, and so you're seeing all this play out, and then you're tasked with the responsibility of like devising a plan and
Mm-hmm.
addressing it. So
Yeah.
now it's like game times go, and there's certain people that are cut out for that, and there's certain people that are not. It's
Mm-hmm.
either
Mm-hmm.
are you going to help, are you ready to take take flight with it, or you know, so a lot of people are just not cut out for that type of work.
Yeah.
And I learned from what I was doing that I don't know if I ever want to be a substance abuse counselor again.
Yeah.
The burnout rate was just like too crazy. I
Yeah.
burned out. That was
It,
it.
it's intense. It's intense. And one of the things that you said that really spoke to me was the word fix, because I think that's what a lot of people assume, right? That therapists and providers fix people. And the reality is that we don't fix people, right? I mean, we can't fix people. They're not broken. The problem is that they're complex. We're complex, right? Everything that you just shared, I think it's really important because it's part of a deeper level problem. It's a societal thing, right? Poverty, as the way that substances are so accessible, racism, all of these isms, right, that impact, especially people of color, right, and do lead to, um, a lot of these things, right, especially when we're talking about substance abuse. And I just, it's such a complex issue, and obviously it's not something that is simple to try to address. I mean, I live in San Francisco, and you can go on the streets and see the homeless problem, and LA too, right? I mean, it's a huge problem, and they've been trying to, or quote unquote, trying to address it for so long, and yet
Yeah.
it's still there. And so I think it just speaks to a larger issue, that's more embedded in society, and more complex than people's mental health, because mental health is also impacted by psychosocial factors, right? In terms of like access to things and experiences and
Hmm.
education and all of these other pieces. So, I can't say that I have an answer or a response to ways of addressing poverty and homelessness, but it definitely, I mean, we're seeing it, right? We're seeing the repercussions of it, and the work that you're sharing is very, very challenging, especially working as a substance counselor, because is not simple, right? This is body, mind, soul. I mean, everything that's involved in there, and it takes a lot. And I'm glad that you also brought up the burnout rate, because there definitely is a lot of vicarious trauma that happens for providers. And this is not just for therapists, or it's anybody working with people who are struggling,
Hmm.
right? Having to deal with constant crises and constant stress and situations like the one you shared, it's going to cause us to react to it, right? Because we're also human and we're going to respond to it, whether it's in that moment or whether it's later on. And so it is hard, right? I mean, it's a balancing act of how do we do this work and help people, even when people are struggling to the point that they're not able to really fully engage in their own treatment and care, especially when we're talking about substances, and then also taking care of ourselves, right? Because it's a lot, and we have to take care of ourselves. In Psychosocial, I wrote an article not too long ago, and I like writing a lot about that, about just the burnout and the vicarious trauma, because there's a high burnout rate for mental health professionals in general, right?
Hmm.
Because there's this expectation to continuously see people and make it quick, make it fast, and fix the problem, and then move on. And that's not a reality. That's not how mental health works. And I think that's one of the failures of systemic mental health, right? Whether it's programs where they're funded by the government and they're expecting therapists to write like 20 pages of notes and then still see like 30 patients, or see them like um, for like all different types of models, like individual and family, and then still do case management. I mean, I know a lot of colleagues that
Yeah.
burned out. I've done that work. I worked in nonprofits where the people were amazing. The work was absolutely worth, just going into the field. But then when it came to like the policies, the expectations, paperwork, and then also managing crises and handling multiple roles, it was not realistic, and it was obviously um, something that leads to burnout, right? And so the secondary trauma you were talking about, I mean, it's real, and a lot of people experience it, right? Whether it's starting to not be able to sleep yourself, I remember I had a lot of nightmares at one point, hearing so many stories of sexual abuse and stories of physical abuse, and then other trauma, that it started to take a toll on me. And as a therapist, for me, one of my most important self-care acts is going to therapy myself. So I have my own therapist that I see, who is very supportive and also very helpful. And that's my way of processing a lot of that vicarious trauma that happens. So I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't know the process or the work, or just how challenging it can be. And so I think that's why it's so important for us to take care of ourselves, but also to continuously educate people, right? Continuously correct people, in terms of what it means for people who have substance issues, right? That it's not
Hmm.
something where I remember my mom would say they can just quit, and I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's like an addiction. It's an illness. Like, it's not
Hmm.
a simple, these people are bad and they're just choosing to. And it was such a hard concept to grasp, because society wise, people think that, well, why don't they just quit? Why don't they get a job? Why don't, and it's like, ugh, like, you're not really understanding the like deeper rooted issues that happen. And a lot of us, I think, in the Latino community, have a lot of pride, because we have that mentality of pick ourselves by our bootstraps and do the work, and we're successful, and we do our best to represent our familia and all these things. But we also start to look at other people sometimes and see them as weak, because we think, oh, if they didn't do this, it's because they weren't strong enough. How come we did it? We survived through poverty. And the reality is that we're all different. We're all different. I think all of us have family members who struggle, right? Who have a hard time, and we notice the criticism, we notice the judgment, and it's hurtful. And it's an assumption. And I think that's why it's so important, even for you right now, sharing your story of working in that specific population, how challenging it is, and how difficult it is for people doing the work. So, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is a grind. It's a challenge. It's to make sure that you're keeping yourself afloat and keeping yourself healthy mentally, physically. and spiritually, making sure that you're okay to come in to provide care and help for the individuals that you're supposed to,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
help. It, you can go into this to whether field you're working in, especially the mental health field, substance abuse field, if you're not good with your own self, because
Yeah.
then it leads to a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
Because then there's signs of trauma,
Yeah.
or I mean, sorry, signs of burnout.
Yeah.
The signs of burnout could be lack of sleep, like you said. Irritability is
Mm-hmm.
like way high. Not feeling satisfied with your work, like
Mm-hmm.
feeling really unsatisfied, feeling not connected at all to what you're doing, unmotivated by that.
Mm-hmm.
You notice yourself drinking a little bit too more. You're
Mm-hmm.
having extra cups of wine or beer, whatever you're
Yeah.
taking, um, and so like it actually starts manifesting in yourself, and you start like, oh, you start taking it on. You start abusing substances yourself, and or you might
Mm-hmm.
be indulging too much in that, or you might not just you're
Yeah.
just like not present in the moment
Yeah.
of what you're
Yeah.
trying to do. And so if you see these signs, whatever field you're working in, it might be a good time to start to take a break to see if you could come back
Yeah.
and work from that, or to step out and try something
Mm-hmm.
different, because
Yeah.
you're only putting yourself down a really bad path. And I've seen it with other people that I work, in the field, and then some experiences with myself. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we need to address, and be open about it. I don't think we like to talk about burnout in our
Yeah.
society and workplace. No one wants to feel like they're doing bad at their job, and
Yeah. Or
burnout
like they can't
feels
do
like
the
you're doing
job.
bad. Yeah, inadequate, right? Or you feel like you're failing or whatever it
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah.
But that's like something that we have to address and be okay with. It's hard stepping away though. It's hard.
It is.
I have a lot of pride in what I do, and I didn't want to step away the way I did, and have to
Yeah.
step out, and I
Yeah.
I felt like I failed at some challenges. But when you leave and you realize like, oh, I think I made the right choice. I think I made
Yeah.
the choice where I feel better. I feel okay. I feel interested and engaged and happy with the work I'm doing now, and fulfilled again, and not feeling overbearing, overwhelmed, and feeling like it's like a never ending story. And so you have
Yeah.
those that you need to address within yourself. But
Yeah.
going back to what you said about society issues that we have with mental health, we have a huge crisis in the United States with substance abuse. That's been an issue for a long time. But mental
Mm-hmm.
health, you can't address one without the other. Uh,
Yes.
we have a huge crisis, and if you look at major cities, you see the homeless population has it's spiked, and you see how it is here in the city and how it is in LA and other big cities throughout the country. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of those people have mental health issues are that they're facing that are not addressed. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
them need to be helped, and we're not doing that. We're
Yeah.
not by just housing them only and not providing any services.
Yeah.
You're not going to help the problem.
Yeah.
It's only going to fester and keep going on from there. And I think that if we're going to do these housing programs, or if we're going to do a lot of this stuff, community service for them, whether it be from mental health services, psychiatric services, substance abuse service, community, as far as helping people get back on the feet and getting jobs,
Yeah. Yeah.
and working on themselves, that all needs to be addressed, or else we
Yeah.
will never have a fighting chance at this.
Yeah.
That's in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right. We're seeing some of those things change, particularly with San Francisco, the city that's mostly been very progressive, or known to be very progressive, with that change in sending mental health professionals out instead of police to help people who are having a mental health, issue. Because that's also another problem, right? That as of now, most places you depend on the police to handle mental health crises. And we've seen so many cases where people are shot, people are killed because they're acting erratic. They're having an episode, or there's just something going on. And that's a huge issue because police are not trained. They're not mental health professionals. And their job is to, stop situations at whatever that means, right? And And I don't want to go too much into that because I have my own views on, and obviously that's very political too. But my basically what I'm trying to say is that we need to redefine the way that we see mental health as a society, and also the way that we address it, right? Whether it is switching it from using brute force to like actually having professionals who know how to handle crises, who know how to help people, be the ones to respond to these kinds of situations. And I think that that's something very important, that we have failed so many people when it comes to mental health because of our lack of understanding, the stigma, and also not wanting to put funding into it, right? Not wanting to put the money into helping people. And I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, people are not gaining anything from it. I mean, I think that's the big issue, right? Going back to society stuff. It's like we're putting so much money in military, but we don't put anything into education or mental health, at least not enough. And we're expecting things to get better or change. It doesn't work that way. And the other part too is that not a lot of people want to go into the mental health field. And personally for me, I can say that it's been an amazing experience. That I love it. I love the work I do, but it is hard and it is challenging, and it does come with a lot of balancing and juggling. I've gone from being on call 24/7 to having to visit clients in the hospital who try to commit suicide, to dealing with substance use. It's a lot, and I think that that's the other piece too, is that there's no incentive, right? There's no emphasis or a lot of acknowledgement towards mental health professionals who do a lot of work. And so that also leads to burnout and feeling underappreciated, feeling
Hmm.
undervalued, not being paid enough to handle the kind of work that people are trying to force on you. So it all goes back to the same thing. It's a very systemic issue. And, you were just sharing right now about the poverty, right? And how we can't deal with it without the mental health piece. You're absolutely right, because we're not just body, we're body and mind, and we're connected, we're human. And just giving someone someplace to live in doesn't solve anything, right? It just gives people somewhere to be locked in. It's not really addressing the deeper level.
Yeah.
um, so I think it all goes hand in hand. And I'm glad to see that there's been some type of ideas, at least in San Francisco, with that, right? With creating their own task force, and like having actual mental health professionals go out. Because I mean, I've read so many stories, and to be honest with you, that's been one of the hardest things about the field, is seeing how people are treated because of something that they can't control, right? Whether it's having a psychotic episode or whether they're schizophrenic. And it's really sad that families lose their family members, don't know how to help them, and there's no easy access to it. That's the other thing. Access is horrible. I've had a lot of families say, I don't even know where to start to find someone to help. I don't even know who to
Well,
call.
well, if you work in the field and if you ever had a 5151 or 5150 someone, it's a scary experience for the individual because the police all come in, they question that person. If they are a danger to themselves, they handcuff them, they put them in the back of a wagon, they take them out to the hospital out here, and then they put them in the psychiatric ward and they hold them for 72 hours. And so, how do you not expect people to react, in a way that it's not great for everyone involved, especially for themselves? How do you expect them not to be a danger to themselves um, in that situation? And so it's hard because sometimes you have to 5150 someone,
Hmm.
and it's not like you want to do. You're doing it for the benefit of the individual, but you also see what comes with it.
Yeah.
I do like that approach, putting mental health out there. We have to find what works and what's the baseline.
Hmm.
There's some things that we'll push back on, like a domestic violence situation.
Hmm.
Those where it becomes very deadly and dangerous,
Hmm.
especially if the
Hmm.
individual has a weapon or anything like that. So those, how do you balance sending licensed professional to help that and having, police on hand as well, so it doesn't break out a certain type of way. Um, that being said, yes, let's address the situation. Let's address the issues. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a mental health crisis, someone having erratic episode. If you ever lived in the cities, you probably saw somewhere downtown, or if you're in the on the Hay, or if you're in the Mission, sometimes you'll see it. I see it a lot, especially I work at my other job on Hate Street, and so I would see it sometimes, and you just see like paramedics there and the fire department, and they're all trying to help the individual to get them on a gurney, put them in the, take the person, and they're fighting with the cops, they're fighting with the paramedics, they're going through that episode, and it's like there's a lot of people standing around. And it's like it could be kind of imposing, um, but like it's like how do we help that individual so this doesn't become a reoccurrence, right? That this doesn't happen a couple times a week, that this doesn't happen several times a month, that it's not something. If we keep seeing this as an issue, how do we pull this person into a system where we can and be able to give them the right type of treatment instead of sending them back out on the street again for this to occur? Because not only is it costly, it's just morally like bankrupt. Like we're just, are we having a compassionate society, or are we having a punitive society? Are we just going to punish these people? Are we just going to lock them up just for this, for substance issues and stuff like that, and hope that they change? Or are we just doing this a cycle that keep going on and going on and going on? That being said, how did you specialize in the marriage or family therapist sector? I saw that you work with people of color, LGBTQ community, indigenous populations. So how do you specialize in that?
Yeah, so my perspective on therapy is encompassing culture. I am definitely a big believer in the importance of culture, identity, challenging, mis- just challenging a lot of the systemic crap that infiltrates us as people of color. So for me, I've worked with every population. I mean, just to start off with, I've worked with everyone from kids all the way to seniors in their 80s and 90s, every different group, different religions. And after I was doing that work, I realized that where my strengths lie, right? I think as a therapist, and most therapists go through this process, you find what it is that you're good at with, right? What populations you resonate with, you can connect with, you can support, you can feel, you can find strength in. And this is the thing that this is why finding a therapist process is also challenging, because it's not one size fits
Mm-hmm.
all. You don't just find a therapist and they're great for you, right? Like it's way more complex than that. And that's the other reason why at the beginning we were talking about why we need so many therapists of color, because there's not that many. And we have a lot more people of color who are starting to realize that therapy and mental health is a real thing, and that there is help out there. The problem is that a lot of times, what I hear is from people of color, I've gone to a white therapist, they don't understand my experience. It didn't feel helpful, right? And so this is the thing. Like I think for me, one of my reactions to a lot of that, but also my own personal experience, was that there is a certain level of power in working with someone that you can resonate with, that understands a lot of the complex experiences, right, that you've gone through, and maybe not the same ones, but that can resonate with them. And so when I started to build my private practice, psychosocial therapy, one of my goals was to do it but love it. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I told
Mm-hmm.
myself I'm gonna do this, but I'm also gonna love it. And I know that the work that I love is working with other Latinx folks, is working with BIPOC folks, people of color, indigenous folks, is working with the LGBTQ community as someone who identifies as a gay man. I've gone through my own experience, and I love the work. And so that's pretty much what really moved me towards specializing in those areas. I'm also currently working on getting certified as a sex therapist, and that's also another uh, important part for me, because sexuality is something that we don't talk about in the Latinx community a lot, and or other communities of color. And so part of my work is really challenging a lot of these um, things that hold us back, and exploring with people and really giving them a space to be human, but also to be able to feel feel that they're talking to someone who can understand or who can at least hold that space for them, right? And so that's kind of where it all started for me. And so I do specialize right now. All of my clients and my practice are Latinx or LGBTQ folks. So I love that work. It's something that I'm continuing to focus on. Um, and yeah, I mean, I see the need. It's funny because a lot of people usually when they meet me and they find out I'm a therapist, and other therapists or anywhere I go, like any type of like meeting or convention or whatever, I'm always told, "Wow, you're a unicorn." Like nobody ever finds any Latinx, gay, Spanish speaking like therapists. Like it's so rare to find that. And at first, it felt good to kind of be recognized, and then I started to really hate that because it started to feel really lonely. So that's one thing where I do recognize that there are not a lot of us, and I do my best to really connect with other folks who also identify in similar ways. And there's not that many, at least in San Francisco. Most of my connections are in LA, which is funny because I think there's obviously more people there, so there's more therapists, more Latinx therapists. It's hard to meet other colleagues that identify as people of color. And that's why through Psychosocial, which is my platform that I created with other therapists, its intention is to educate, but also build community. So one of my team members, her name is, oh my gosh, I'm like trying blank. Cynthia Flores, a close friend. She's also a associate marriage and family therapist, and she and I both created Reclaiming Wellness, which is part of Psychosocial. And basically, the whole purpose is to have meetups and have workshops for only therapists of color. And it's because we don't have a lot of spaces to be able to do that. We don't have a lot of organizations that focus on people of color. And so for me, that's very crucial. So I've done that work through Psychosocial, through the content we create, through my own therapy practice, through the media stuff that we put out on Instagram and Facebook, and that's my passion. And I think that's definitely where I feel good and comfortable. And so doing that work for me has been the most rewarding, and especially because growing up, I didn't know about mental health. I didn't have a therapist. I didn't know that there was help out there. And so part of my mission has always been to destigmatize that within our communities and to tell people that it's okay to get help. The same way that we go to the doctor and, check up yearly or get our physical checkups or go for whatever reason because we have symptoms. Mental health is the same thing, and we need to value it just as much as we do physical care. And so that's why I focus in those populations because I know that there's a higher need there. I relate because I am one of them. I'm one of the people in those communities, and also because it's become a passion for me, right? To really encourage awareness around mental health and just this what is it demystify all of these different areas of mental health, what it means, what it is, uh, the types of treatment, right? Because therapy is not the only treatment. There's a lot of different healing practices, but to motivate people to engage in healing and to engage in mental health practices.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing a lot of great work that, like you said, there's not a lot of people like you that are in this field, and it's great to see some representation because it does matter, especially on this level when you're trying to communicate and trying to, like you said, hold that space, and you're holding that space for a certain community that needs that help more than ever.
Yeah.
And going forward, um, it's going to be people like you that are going to make this biggest change because everyone's going more digital. Everyone's going to this
Yeah.
route. So it's we're going away from traditional settings, and so having the space available and be able to communicate to people and on Instagram, on Facebook, or whatever platform that you choose on your website, you're able to connect for a wider range of people that might not be able to have be able to get your services otherwise. You might be able
Yeah.
to work with someone that's in Northern California, way at the top, where they're 6 hours away from San Francisco, but
Yeah.
they're able to get in contact with you, and you're able to still help them, or you're able to work with people in other cities or other counties. I understand with therapy you can't work in other states because you have to be licensed in other states,
Mhm. Yeah.
but it does help you be able to broaden the scope of your practice where you're able to bring in people that desperately need the help and
Yeah.
need the care. And so
Yeah.
that's where the work is at, and that's where I see this going. So your media is psychosocial.media, and
Yes.
on there you have blog posts, and you also do videos on
Yeah.
there as well, or just
Yeah, yeah. So the website is www.psychosocial.media, and that's the main platform. And it's basically an educational platform. So we have about 22 therapists who submit articles to our website on different mental health topics. All of our provide contributors are mental health professionals of color. A lot of them are bilingual. And we also have some other people that are not therapists that do more in terms of political or do more in terms of coaching. And so they also contribute articles. And so we have a lot of free articles for people. And then we also offer a very cheap membership. I think it's like $2 a month or $20 for a year, where you get access to other content, right? Like more articles that are a little bit more special or that are created a particular reason. And so the whole purpose of the website is, one, we also include resources. We include downloadable content, stuff that people can download, worksheets that they can use. We have, hotlines and all of that, the articles. We also provide consultation for groups and organizations. So, we basically support people in educating and creating awareness around mental health. Now, psychosocial therapy is my own private practice, so it's through psychosocial, but that's just my practice. And that's where I provide individual therapy. So I only work with adults, and like I said, like you were sharing, I only work with Latinx and BIPOC and LGBTQ folks. Um, and I don't work with couples or children right now. Like I said, it's been a very much uh, intentional kind of space that I'm trying to create. So I do specialize in adults of color or LGBTQ folks. So that's been something nice. That's something that I just started last month, and I'm really excited to continue doing that work and offering a space for people who do need a therapist. That they can resonate with. So that's a different platform. And then Reclaiming Wellness, what I had mentioned, that's part of the main platform. And that's just more of a social movement for professionals of color. We have a book club right now where therapists and other mental health providers were reading a book called The Body's Not an Apology. And so we read the book and then we all get together and talk about it and political issues and social justice issues, creating a space to talk about how it impacts our work as therapists. Just creating a lot of different stuff. So it's all really exciting. And we partner with a lot of other great platforms like Latinx Therapy. We just got a partnership with Mental Health America where we're writing articles in Spanish for them and they're utilizing our resources. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up. And yeah, that's pretty much psychosocial. And our Instagram is psychosocial_media.
well, thank you for coming on today. I appreciate this talk. We had a really great conversation. I learned a lot from just the insights that you're able to provide and the work that you do, and it's amazing work. And
Thank you.
I hope everyone's able when they have a chance to check it out and just become more just have bring awareness to them. Not saying that everyone needs therapy, but everyone needs to be more aware. So
Yes.
everyone has someone that they need that needs help in their life. So just being aware of you know culturally, society, whatever it might be. Um, like I said, thank you, and I appreciate you for coming on.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for having me.